Joseph Anthony Fiorenza, priest, servant leader, advocate for the poor, and voice of the voiceless, builder and first Archbishop of Galveston-Houston, was a man of tireless faith. I'm Father Jeff Boehm, pastor and rector of the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, and we are pleased to share the story of Archbishop Fiorenza, who not only served as the first administrator of the Co-Cathedral in Houston in 1959, but was the principal force behind the construction of the new Co-Cathedral that serves our Archdiocese today. From his earliest days growing up in his hometown of Beaumont, Texas, Archbishop Fiorenza was steeped in the Catholic faith. Born in a hospital run by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word and educated by the Dominicans, his faith was a crucial part of his home life.
I do remember this vaguely growing up. My grandparents died very early. Going to their house on Sundays because they're all excited because Uncle Joe was coming to town. Joe was coming in town because they wanted to see him. And of course, there was 4 brothers, and he was the priest out of the bunch. And of course, my grandmother, he hung the moon. I mean, he knew what he wanted to be. He knew he wanted to be a priest.
Bishop Fiorenza had been the vice president of the Bishops' Conference in 97. In 1998, he was elected president, which is not unusual, of the Bishops' Conference. And the general secretary of the Bishops' Conference in those days was Father Dennis Schnurr, a priest of the Diocese of Sioux City, Iowa, where I was the new bishop. So when Bishop Fiorenza became president, he would, greet me, "Oh, you're Denny Schnurr's guy." So then, his last year of being the president of the Bishops' Conference, Father Schnurr was due to come back to Sioux City. His term was over. So everyone gets a charge out of this. This was the first I ever noticed this happening. Bishop Fiorenza called me one day in Sioux City. He said, "Hey, hello, Dan. How are you today?" I said, "Well, Bishop Fiorenza, fine. What's up?" And he said, "Well, Dan, I'm going to be president for another year. And it's really hard after you get so used to really liking a guy." And he goes on and on. He said, "Dan, I don't think you wouldn't mind if Dennis stayed on another year, would you?" "Well, what are you going to do? It's the president of the Bishops' Conference." So I said, "Well, okay, Joe, it's okay. Dad, that's nice." And then he hung up. So
Archbishop Fiorenza was the epitome of a shepherd. And I'm sure he loved it when Pope Francis said, "You got to have the smell of the sheep." Fiorenza had the smell of the sheep. He knew his church, his own church internally, and he also knew the society that surrounded him. And he was constantly at service to do the one thing that his motto says that he wanted to achieve. And on the motto of his Episcopal coat of arms, it says, "Thy kingdom come." He lived up to that motto in every possible way.
I also got to know him in the last few years as well, for a longer time, closer to him. And when he was still coming here to this building, to the Chancery building and in his office, and then he was relegated to his room, and with a great sense of energy and whatever he had, using it till the very end, until when he lost it all, and we went back to the Creator and Father of all. So always with a person that think about the good of others, and ultimately the good of the Church, the people of God.
When he was a young priest, he went to Rome to be with Bishop Noel during the Second Vatican Council. And Bishop Noel was blind, and so someone had to accompany him in the hotels and take him to St. Peter's. So I think he got a sense of what the council was asking, pastoral leadership. So I would characterize him as a very strong pastoral leader for the church, and who knew Texas, who knew the local diocese very well.
He always managed to smile, especially when he was doing something that might be a little more difficult. He knew how to win the hearts of people. He knew how to influence them to think his way or think about an issue in a very rational way. He was very good at that. But he always had time to sit and listen. And when you talked to him, he listened. He looked you in the eye, and he, wanted to hear what you had to say, and then he'd comment, and then you'd listen.
And when I was a nursing student in the late 60s, Bishop Joe was Father Joseph Fiorenza at the time, and he was a Catholic chaplain at St. Joseph Hospital, downtown Houston. It was one of our hospitals, and for some reason, he was the only Catholic chaplain at the time. He began like in the late 50s, and I remember him being there when I was a nursing student living there. Sister Martina Casey, who was in charge of the nursing school, asked him to teach ethics to the students. But we used to see him, when we were in the convent and in the hospital. So that was my first memory of Archbishop Fiorenza.
Well, I first met Bishop Fiorenza virtually, really, vicariously, you might say. His name was a household word among the sisters, and they had wonderful memories of him, Bishop Joe, as they referred to him as, from his time working as chaplain at St. Joseph's Hospital. They would talk especially about his thoughtfulness and bringing in 7-Up and Coca-Cola and things that were not accessible at the time to the sisters.
I was 36 years old, but up to even before his death, and he keeps saying that he is the co-founder of the community. But who is the founder, we don't know. But the sister keeps saying he was the co-founder. But I can tell you that from the bottom of our heart, first we grateful to God, and also his assistant. Thank God for us and pray for Bishop Fiorenza.
I was the pastor down in Freeport, and then when he came back from San Angelo to be the bishop of this diocese, he invited me to be his secretary and vice chancellor. So, and that was, what an honor. I wasn't expecting that. Bishop Fiorenza had a great wit. Dry, it would surprise you. It would come out of nowhere. You knew you had just been hit by his wit. I remember one day, and it was all hilarious, but remember one day I came out of my office and there he was, and I said, Bishop, I just need to tell you that next week I'm going to be away a few days. And he said, how will we know the difference? There's nothing else to say after that. He had the greatest one-liners I ever heard.
He could look at the bigger picture, and he could see what the implications of that could be or would be. And when you get into those two things, and you have the faith, and you have the integrity, and you have the smarts to be able to pull those three things together, I think it makes for a fantastic leader. And I think that's what, people, and I personally saw him as a leader, but again, back to that very human, because sometimes we get the impression that leaders are above us, and that wasn't his style of leadership. And that's what endeared him to so many people.
I was in the seminary, and so my first meeting with him was as a seminarian. Pretty intimidating, right? He's kind of a big guy behind the desk, and yes, sir, and I was a seminarian. And so I just remember at the very beginning how well loved and respected he was by the priests who were his peers, like his friends.
I think we were talking earlier, and I feel like when you greeted him, he would reach out that big giant hand, and it felt just so warm and inviting. And I think he was like that with the community. Like he was just a hand, a comforting hand for the community.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to overestimate the sense of calm and strength and compassion and, holiness that he brought with him to what he did. He'd been in this house so many times. He'd been in all our houses, and he was at every major event, wedding, confirmation, baptisms. He was here for Easter and Christmas, and so he became sort of part of our family.
A product of Catholic education, Archbishop Fiorenza constantly sought to promote Catholic schools, especially when they served those most in need.
It was really in Catholic education that I truly got to know him. In the Diocese of San Angelo, I was principal there, and here in Galveston-Houston. And I treasured his commitment just like his successor, Cardinal DiNardo. Archbishop Fiorenza was highly committed to Catholic education and making it accessible and affordable to everyone that wanted that type of education.
Education was so important to him that he was always such a supporter of Catholic education for all of us. All of us in the high schools and the elementary schools, he just saw it as such an important part of our faith.
When I first got here, he picked me up the first time when I was coming for the announcement to be coadjutor. And he drove me into town. The first place he took me to was to the cemetery, I think north of town. And he said, "Dad, probably this will be a place where you'll be buried." So he took me there. Then he took me to Our Lady of Guadalupe, an inner city school. You could tell from the very beginning he was extremely concerned, and he told me that about Catholic education, and particularly Catholic education in the inner city. And he said, "Dad, I don't want our school to be just for the rich and wealthy. I want our schools to be a place where those of little or no means can go to our schools."
As the bishop and then Archbishop of Galveston-Houston, Archbishop Fiorenza led a diverse and growing church that included the expansion of social services and constructing numerous new churches, including the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart.
I still remember him bringing me the plans of the new cathedral, Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart. This huge bunch of plans. He plopped them down in front of my desk, opened them up, and said, "You love this, don't you, Dan?" He closed them up and took them with him. I said, "Oh, sure, Joe, that's fine." So, obviously he was going to do this Co-Cathedral. Nobody else was going to do it. Because he was so dedicated to it and really spent such a huge amount of time making sure it went up and all, by the time the cathedral was done, the Co-Cathedral next door, I was the Archbishop. So I was going to dedicate it, and I said, "Yeah, I will." But when it came time to put the chrism on the altar, I did that, and then I called you over and said, "You do this. You consecrate the altar." Because really, it was kind of his project, and I think he deserved to have that happen.
From marching in Selma to defending those who clean office spaces in downtown Houston, tackling police reform, and advocating for the creation of a public defender's office, Archbishop Fiorenza was both a religious and civil leader.
Dad, I think first started talking about him when they were working together on the campaign for the homeless, which was many, many years ago. And they were part of this group of clergy who really recognized that issue as being a fundamental issue for Houston. And they started spending some time together. And I remember when Dad would speak to him about him or describe him, he would say, "He is a good man." From my father, that was just sort of a very significant way to describe somebody.
Well, first off, it's hard to imagine not having known the Archbishop. Of course, we knew him first as a bishop. He was not the Archbishop all of our lives. But I have always known of their friendship because back in the early civil rights days when I was still in my middle school, high school years, I remember the partnership between the Honorable Reverend Fiorenza and pastor of an Episcopal church, pastor of a Jewish temple, my dad. They were all concerned about the homeless and about what was happening in Houston. The civil rights era and desegregation were important, and then later it was the issue of the homelessness. And so I always remembered the affiliation of our dad with multiple clergy, and Fiorenza was always one of those.
A memory that sticks very close to me. Several memories. Every time I saw Archbishop, he would say, "Oh, Roxanne," and he would embrace me. And it's that just ease of his emotions and the love that he expresses to people. It always made me feel hugely special and important because the Archbishop, knows me by my first name, and he hugs me each time that he sees me. He is such a wonderful human being, and I sorely miss him.
Well, I'm like Cheryl and Roxanne. I can't remember a time when he wasn't in our life. We knew him as bishop, and then we knew him as archbishop. But my dad always called him Joe. He and Rabbi Carf, the three of them would get together, and it was Bill, Sam, and Joe. There were no pretenses.
I keep thinking of his constant work with those who did the cleaning in the offices downtown. He was constantly coming back to that, being present when some of their organizational meetings and all. He, again, was particularly interested in good racial relationships. He had formed with Reverend Lawson and with Rabbi Carf, the three amigos, and they were very intensive together about the need for social justice in the city of Houston. They did a very good job of that.
He describes sort of the relationship he had with Archbishop and Reverend Lawson, and he says, these are my dad's words, "Through collaboration on issues of social justice, the three of us have bonded and become soulmates. We are close enough to call on each other with our concerns, and we care for each other's welfare." And I just thought that was so beautiful.
One day, he went back, and we were in this, it's like a movie, but I mean, we were like in his hometown, Gibolina, Sicily, on the Feast of St. Joseph. And he celebrated the Mass at the church. The whole town was out, and then they did a procession through the streets with the statue of Joseph and people throwing the money, and it was just beautiful. They ended up at the city hall where they were so proud that their son had become president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. And so I could see there's a sense within him, like was maybe even driving him to do more for people, was a sense of pride in his family and wanting to respect his family in Sicily, that they could be proud of him. I think he always maintained that.
But I'll tell one funny story.
Really funny.
That I love. We had a place up in Fredericksburg, and Archbishop was up there, and Brendan was there, and we were in our Suburban on our way to San Antonio to watch Notre Dame play football. They'd come to San Antonio. Now, Brendan is Father Brendan Cahill at the time. He's working at the Archdiocese. The Archbishop's next to me. Brendan's in the back seat, and Carrie and Lance and everybody are, in the rest of the Suburban. And so I've got them captive, right? Brendan and Archbishop. And I say to Archbishop, because there'd been some rumors floating around, and I say, "Archbishop, what are the odds of Brendan being made bishop?" Which, of course, is the wrong thing to ask. You're not allowed to ask that question. Even if he knew, he wouldn't disclose it, and he didn't miss a beat. And I looked back, and I looked in the back rearview mirror, and Brendan's kind of, embarrassed, awkward, but also a little hopeful, wondering if he's going to get some information. He doesn't miss a beat, and he said, "Sean, the Irish stranglehold on the church is over." And it was so fast. It's like he knew what I was going to ask, and he had a comeback. He was so funny.
So funny, quick-witted.
He was very kind. He always took the time to speak to just about everyone. And there were no false pretenses there. There was no sense of I'm better than anybody else, or I'm someone who has such grandeur in my life. He was always just Joe.
He embodied what Isaiah says in chapter 11 of the book of Isaiah. And it says this: "His inspiration will be the fear of Yahweh. His judgment will not be by appearances, and his verdict will not be given on hearsay. He will judge the weak with integrity, and give fair sentence to the humblest in the land.
Archbishop Fiorenza's legacy of faith, social justice, racial equality, and education in Houston and beyond will continue to inspire people of goodwill for years to come.